Hello, hello. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, skeptics, critics, anybody who has ever had an opinion. Welcome to Campus Debates. As always, it is a Tuesday night at 8 p.m. I am your host, Abigail Wangoi, a judge, a debater, but again for tonight, your host. Welcome to Campus Debates, a show that gives you an intellectual perspective, a conversational perspective about recent, integral, and critical issues that inform not only our society, but the entire world around us. But what makes this show so special? We are giving you all these perspectives from the point of view of the youth, present university students, and probably the biggest population in our country today. And with that said, let us meet our participants for tonight. Speakers, come on in. All right. So, from side proposition, representing Strathmore University, we have the team of Akoto Olubai and Kiragu Kimani. Give them a round of applause. From side opposition, representing the University of Nairobi and our host for tonight's episode, give it up for Massive Ugutsa and Michael Awimbo. Okay, take a seat. Again, a round of applause. And as always, judging the fine speakers are a panel of three great seasoned debaters who also participate as judges. Sharing this wonderful round, we have the chair, the mighty Mohammed Abdullahi. Give him a round of applause. And in the middle, we have a lady. I think, actually, pass her the microphone. Given the fact that she was the only lady bold enough to join the gentlemen, let her introduce yourself. Tell the viewers at home what your name is.
My name is Teresia Karimi. I'm the founder of University of Nairobi Debate Association.
Okay. That is the second OG that we've had on the show. And lastly, for the panelists, we have Mr.
Hilary Matano.
Okay, Hilary Matano. I was going to do it, but he said I can do it myself. Okay. So, founder of UON Society. That is very interesting. Can I ask, although this might end up alluding to your age, can I ask, how long ago did you found this society?
2021.
2021, okay, so still fairly new in the circuit, but still capable of hosting campus debate societies. Okay, that's it for the judges, that's it for the participants. Now, enough with the chit-chat. We know what you came here for. You came here to hear people debate about critical issues. And with that said, our motion for today is, this House believes that the Finance Act Bill of 2023 that matters with do with taxes does more harm than good. This House believes that the Finance Act of 2023 tax resolutions does more harm than good to the citizens. Speakers, are you ready? Judges, are you ready? Welcoming the first speaker of the proposition. Here.
Firstly, it's a great honor to be here tonight and to be on this stage. So I shall start my debate with an understanding of the context within which Kenya finds itself. So firstly, Kenya is a lower income country, so it does not necessarily have a lot of wealth and purchasing power. Secondly, Kenya is currently in a recession. This is proved by instances like, say, companies laying off employees to lower costs and citizens cutting their spending, and furthermore, by reduced investment within the economy. Thirdly, we have high levels of public debt. And then fourthly, we mainly have an informal economy and a small formal economy. So then how does this then impact the decision to pass the Finance Act 2023? Firstly, we believe that on our side, that the small formal economy is already overburdened with taxes. Employees have had increased taxes this year. Notable among them is the housing levy. Secondly, consumers are spending less. So when they spend less, the government collects less taxes, such as VAT or fuel levy when they buy petrol at the fuel station. Furthermore, being a lower income country, we do not necessarily have the ability to withstand these high forms of taxation. So what do we propose? We propose that instead of increasing taxes, it is the government that should reduce its spending. Why? So We believe that more taxes is not the right solution right now because the citizens are hurting, that people cannot afford food. People are struggling to pay rent, struggling to pay fees for their students. So it's imperative for the government to reduce the very real and very immediate suffering of its own citizens. Furthermore, we believe that government spending right now is quite high. The salaries of certain civil servants are high, and we believe their salaries should be cut, and also the government should cut spending within certain departments in order to lower the government spending overall and to avoid increasing the burden on the citizens. We believe it is not fair for the government to continue or even increase its spending, and while the citizens suffer. The government should be there to serve the citizens. We believe that for a country to prosper, it is necessary for each and every one to contribute what is necessary, especially when times are tough. So taxes have already gone up on citizens. Inflation has already gone up and is reducing the purchasing power of citizens. So we believe the government in turn should also tighten its belt by cutting its spending. Furthermore, we believe that we'd also like to look at the possible harms that this bill would do both to the citizens and then also to the government. So firstly, the harm it does to the citizens is, as stated before, people have very real and genuine suffering, struggling to afford their bills. Furthermore, we believe that these increased taxes have like second-order effects on citizens. So you might see things such as increased depression, increased instances of, say, suicide, alcoholism, drug abuse, or domestic violence because of the financial and psychological pressure this puts citizens under. We believe these second-order effects are also important to consider and not just the economic numbers. We need to look at the very real pain and the very real human story behind these numbers. Furthermore, the harm that it does to the government is that, one, it chases away investors. I don't think investors would want to come to Kenya, both local and foreign, if the taxes that will be on their businesses will be quite high. Secondly, we believe that businesses close down, so taxes increase, it reduces businesses' profits, therefore they decide to shut down. So the government loses. It loses the corporate taxes these businesses would have paid, they lose out on the VAT they'd have paid, and they lose out on the payee they would have paid on from the employees they've laid off. And then finally, there's also less spending within the economy. So if you go to the supermarket, if you'd have bought 2 packets of unga before and you only buy 1, then you've reduced your spending, and then the government collects less value-added tax because you're not spending as much, because VAT is levied on spending. So we believe the harm to the citizens is real, and the harm to the citizens is very real in their suffering, and then the harm to the government is that they actually end up reducing tax revenue, and then it makes it even harder, say, to fund government programs and to pay off loans, especially such as the IMF such as the Eurobond loan that is due in June next year. So we believe the government should simply keep taxes as they are, or even reduce them slightly, and it should cut down their spending. Thank you.
All right, that was the argument for the first speaker of the proposition side. We now hear the first speaker from side opposition. Here.
First, a rebuttal to what we get from the proposition team. They tell us to the point that the government reduces the spending, then the suffering will become less. I want to posit from opposition that is false, because reduced government spending means reduced infrastructural development. That looks like things like healthcare will be less developed. Things like education will be less developed. The idea of building housing will be less developed. The impact of that is that the idea of depression they tell you, and suffering is exacerbated to a larger degree by that regard. Now to the case you get from the opposition bench. We concede to one thing they do in their characterization, where they tell us Kenya is largely a global south country that is very dependent on loans. That is very critical in this particular debate, right? To the point that Uhuru was leaving the government and Ruto was taking in the government, the country was coupled with a lot of loans. That is, the debt of our country had risen from 1.8 trillion to 9.9 trillion by that regard. And the prices of fuel and prices of food and things like that were still very high. And the problem there was that the country was at the verge of defaulting these loans, right? Because the country did not have capacity to pay those loans. And we posit to you the reason why defaulting loans is essentially problematic to a country like Kenya is because Kenya primarily depends on these loans to essentially sustain itself and develop the facilities for its Kenyan people. What these taxes then do, and why we think that it does more good for the people, is that it capacitates the country to be able to pay off these particular loans. And paying off these loans then means this particular country is able to get more loans. The idea in their side of the world, even if they reduce that idea of spending of the government, they still have these loans and they default these loans. Then that means in that side of the world, they're unable to actually make life better for their people. That then becomes problematic in this particular regard. Why then do we think this idea of increasing taxes necessarily increases the revenue for this particular government and therefore trickles down to better life for these particular people? Notice the things that are being taxed. Things like small SMEs, the beauty product, the digital tax, content creators, and fuel, right? The reason why these things were being taxed is because they have a unique avenue to increase and maximize the revenue. Because notice, the things that are being taxed are things that people cannot run away from using. In the long run, they'll have to use them. Therefore means that idea of the taxes will be something that is continuing. And the other thing here is that this actually helps to redistribute the funds, in that if you notice the fuel taxes, the people who have big cars in society are primarily the rich people. Meaning, if you're able to tax such people, we are able to get more money into the economy, because it is unclear why these people will suddenly stop using cars by that regard. So, before I continue, your PI.
Okay, thank you. How will you be able to repay loans if you are not able to collect adequate tax?
We've already proven to you in the characterization of that done of the things that are being taxed why we are able to actually collect sufficient tax in the first place. So the impact of us having this particular money is that we are able to essentially improve the healthcare services, improve the education, improve the capacity of Kenyan people having access to housing. And these are things that these particular people primarily value and things that they feel are very important in their lives. If we do that, we feel we reduce suffering for these particular people. Another probable thing that they would run, we think, is the idea of subsidies. Probably they could come and say from the second speaker that we should probably lower the cost of living and lower prices of things and things like that. Why we think that still becomes worse off and contributes to more harm to their side of the world is that, one, it that whole thing makes the government be stressed more. Why? Because if you're subsidizing things, it then means the government has to pay the added place. If you're subsidizing things like school fees, it means the government meets the subsidized part. That then means you're adding pressure to a government that already does not have money. And we've already proven to you why it is only in our side where we are able to actually pay off those loans and increase the capacity. The other trickle-down effect of these particular taxes is that it helps us as a country become self-sufficient in the long run. That is to say, it helps us to gain more revenue and actually stop relying on loans in the long term. That's making us a self-sufficient country. That then means all harms that comes with loans in our side of the world are likely to be mitigated. And we think that is something that is comparatively better. Something else we think also in terms of the harms that the prop side talks about, those are things that largely still would exist because of things like geopolitical factors. So they cannot come and tell us that it is because of the increment of taxes, because the geopolitical factors play a big role in like those things in entirety. And with that, we've shown you from our side that we are able to better the living of people and essentially increase the capacity of the government, which is something that is very important. With that, I rest.
All right, we are halfway through the speech. You've had the context, you've had the primary arguments that have been said, both for the argument and against the argument. Now, as we take a short break, engage with us on our Twitter handle at KTN Home. Let us know what you think of the taxing situation in the country, which has become very real and very emergent. Alternatively, text us on 22151. We'll never leave you on dread. Coming back after this short break. Here. Debates. Alright, so far the arguments that we've heard from side proposition, we have one person telling us that naturally the country doesn't do well, very well resource-wise, and taxing people more just discourages them from spending more money. On the other side, we have the opposition side telling us, but the fact of the matter is the government doesn't have money, and the only way for the government to have money is to tax its citizens more. Now, let's hear what the second speakers have to say about the arguments laid down primarily. Welcoming the second speaker from side proposition. Here.
Panel, we think the first thing that I'm going to do in my speech is going to be, first of all, to reply to the opposition team, and then I shall proceed to engage with several points of extension. Anyway, they tell us their true goal, which is to make Kenya self-sufficient. We do buy into this idea, and we think it is a good idea, but we don't think it is just achieved with mechanisms that are not well considered and their impacts are not well evaluated. We think generally being self-sufficient is something that at best currently is very idealistic, because even nations that have existed for far longer than Kenya, because we think Kenya is a very young country, like 60 years is still not a scratch on countries that have been around for over 200 years, and yet these countries still engage in things like taking loans. We don't think our economy is anywhere comparable to an economy that is 200 years old. So we really, as my partner tells you, are not in the best spot for these kinds of things. Anyway, when we talk about reduction of government spending, we don't allude to reduction of government spending in terms of healthcare as they would suggest. My partner clearly mentions ideas of inflated salaries, the fact that some institutions of government have bloated budgets. Necessarily, there is money that is being spent without some consideration here, and we think the reduction of these kinds of budgets would be something that we really value. Then the next thing that we really disagree upon is the idea of that they'll be able to pay back loans. Because my partner also gives you analysis that talks about the idea that individuals spend less money. Considering like what has happened in the last 5 years, which we think is what describes or makes us understand what is happening today. You've gone through COVID-19, you've had the Ukraine war, you've had the recent war in Palestine and Israel, and you've had economists saying that the price of fuel is likely to reach 300, which is quite literally unimaginable. It is an impact, it is a price that no one has ever seen in their lifetime who is currently alive. So we think that you are pushing a great burden upon citizens, and we really value the fact that a government is more supposed to be a protector and cares about the state of the citizens and recognizes what is happening on the ground and is not just existing within some kind of like make-believe world where you can really do all that you want. The thing is, the prices of a lot of things have increased. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of companies that used to receive customers are no longer receiving them because people are cutting down on expenditure. They say you increase the price on like goods that somebody can't avoid spending. When the price of fuel went up, a lot of people are having to leave their cars at home, which means you don't even get access to the kind of taxes that are put on fuel because you reduce the amount of spending that goes there. Companies that are not necessarily like essential to your life. If you guys used to buy yogurt at home for your kids, you're probably not going to do this anymore because it is no longer an integral expense. And this is the kind of thing that we mean. And on a large scale, you're likely to affect the kind of tax that government collects, which fundamentally attacks their goal of solving our debt problem. But we think on our side, you're more likely to solve the debt problem by actually encouraging individuals to spend. spend, because clearly they have to defend a side where individuals don't spend. We defend a world where you actually allow your citizens to recover from their recession, to actually be willing to inject money into the economy. They say subsidies, and we don't think this is necessarily like a bad idea, because we think the question is, when do we use subsidies? We use them when they are necessary, when the citizens need them, such that we actually place the burden on a more long-term idea. The weighing here for this kind of thing is the fact that loans can be paid over 20 or 30 years and not necessarily within the next 5 or 10 years. They have like some sort of low interest rates. We have access to a lot of like sort of institutions that offer loans. Look at the IMF, the World Bank, even the China Development Bank is offering loans. You have bilateral agreements. You even have like sort of projects that are set up by companies. All these things mean that it is possible to spur some level of development by actually spending money, despite the fact that it does accrue debt. The reason, if at all they would prove the fact that we are probably struggling with paying debt at the moment, is due to the recession, due to the fact that people feel that I have to hold on to my last coin, because if I don't, I will be poor, or I will not be able to afford what I need. So by and large, you're more likely to cause the economy to shrink, to cause people not to spend, to lower the tax that you actually have access to. And we have several alternatives for this. So we have reduction of like the budgets that are overinflated. We think that my partner talks to you about like the existence of an informal sector. It is very large, and these kinds of this side of the economy could be a huge area that you could actually go into, which is an alternative which will allow the government to actually raise more money. Think about the fact that SMEs, which are companies that your fathers, your mothers try to set up, are the ones that they're saying you should tax. These companies are being taxed more, people are spending less. These companies are likely to crash, which means that the only companies that survive in Kenya are likely to be big conglomerates. These international companies that come from abroad and they're like the Western world, which means you kill like your own internal companies, and we don't think that is a good thing. The idea here is, on an economic level, on a social level, on interaction with your friends, family, you're likely to feel worse off as a Kenyan if you don't have access to money, and the government is trying to ensure that you spend even less. Unnecessarily, it does more harm than good. Thank you.
Okay, that was the last speaker from side proposition. We now welcome the last speaker from side opposition to wrap up the debate. Here.
Panel, how I think we win this debate is if we can prove to you that there's an ability for the government to make revenue despite the high taxes. If we can prove that to you and we show how the citizens will in turn benefit from this increase in taxes, then we win this debate, right? And that's exactly what I'm going to say in terms of like even reinforcing what the first speaker said from side opposition. Proposers come and tell you that this whole idea that governments will have like bloated budgets is essentially harmful, because now they have a lot of money to spend and all these things, and they wouldn't be able to like pay all this. Like that's their solution, right? That governments should actually reduce their bloated budgets. That's their solution to this whole problem. The thing is that these particular government officials, when they get their salary, approximately say someone who's averagely in the working for the government would earn something like 150,000 shillings. If they earn that, that doesn't place them in the rich category. It rather places them in the middle class category. So even reducing their particular salaries on this particular aspect does not even help them in any way. It just makes them broke. They're not able to provide for their families. So even the solution that they're trying to cater for will not benefit the citizens altogether, right? The particular, they say that reducing bloated budgets and all these things will benefit the state. We think that this budgets that they've created are for the benefit of citizens. The whole existence is that, for example, the El Nino thing that is coming, they introduced a budget that will actually counter this introduction of like creating drainages and all these things. They've catered for that in the budget. If we make them to reduce these budgets, then it means that they'll not be able to provide the best of their capability in terms of these funds to provide these things that citizens need. The fund of medical care, the fund of drainages during this El Nino season, if we reduce this budget, then we get subpar things. If we get subpar things, citizens essentially get to suffer. So ideally, the harm that they're trying to eradicate will actually be reinforced in their world because the government will not have an ability to do these things. They tell you that if we actually introduce these taxes, then the people will not be able to spend, and therefore the government will not get this revenue to begin with. We counter that directly by telling you that these particular expenses people cannot run away from. They tell you that people are poor and they'll choose not to spend. We think that by the characterization that you get from the first speaker, that these are rich people, right? These people who have high-end cars are highly rich. Therefore, we think that they prioritize luxury over not spending and all these things. If they prioritize luxury, then we think that they cannot run away from actually driving their cars and choosing public transport because ideally they are rich and they want luxury. So we think that they maximize the capability of the government actually getting revenue because the rich people cannot run away from luxury. They cannot run away from making their hairs. I mean, look at us in this room. We are girls, we are beautiful, we want to actually do our hairs. The only way we can do that, the government knows that we cannot run away from that because we want to continue being pretty. So the whole essence is that the government maximizes on the capability of getting revenue by taxing places that people cannot run away from, regardless of how the situation looks like. They tell you that the poor people will not spend. We agree to that particular aspect, but we think that the poor people will not spend because of the whole existence of recession in and of itself. The only way the government can eradicate itself from the whole recession world that exists right now is by the introduction of taxes. If we reduce the budget, that's only like a drop in the ocean that will only deal with a few things, right? They tell you that these loans will take 20 years to 30 years to mature. We think that that's a mischaracterization. Kenya right now is actually the loan that they all got from a Eurobond is actually maturing in December. They have to pay 300 billion. They do not have money to pay these particular things. If you reduce the budget of this particular government expenditure, it's not going to be enough to raise 300 billion that is essential to pay this debt that is maturing in December. The only way to do that is to tax people to maximize the revenue collection. They tell you people not fuel their cars. Say partly we agree the poor people will not fuel their cars. But we think that when the rich people actually fuel their cars, we get a 16% VAT tax on this particular fueling, right? That's maximization of revenue that we're actually getting. If we can get a maximization of revenue for the few minorities that will actually spend this money, then ideally we think that the government will be able to get this revenue that will benefit it in and of itself. Yeah. We think that, yes, let me take it.
Okay, thank you. The debt that we have to pay is not a doomsday clock. This debt restructuring, you can push the debt forward to when the economy improves. You don't have to tax the lowest earner for you to make 350 million.
Now, the problem with that, the problem with the argument that you can actually push it forward and all these things is very similar to actually defaulting loans. And the first speaker directly told you what harm would actually accrue Kenyans if we default this loan or if we push it forward. The idea is that we can also, let's take their best case scenario, we push it forward. A particular harm will actually accrue Kenyans because we'll no longer have the capacity to borrow these loans going forward because countries will now understand we cannot pay these loans, we'll actually push it forward. If these particular institutions understand that, they'll not prioritize us on the whole aspect of getting these loans to begin with. And as we characterize Kenya as a country that is dependent on loans, we don't get these loans to begin with, we don't survive as a country, we essentially don't even continue to exist, maybe worst case scenario, right? Our case basically in terms of weighing the clashes that have existed in this debate is that in this particular debate is that we weigh this thing in terms of are taxes good for Kenyans or are they harmful for Kenyans? We think that they are going to be essentially beneficial for Kenyans if we actually increase taxation because it benefits the ability of the government to gain revenue, the ability of the government to pay the particular loans that we have, and the ability for the government to actually ensure the services that Kenyans get are the best possible services that they can get. In their world, their case is that if we raise these taxes, then there are going to be harms in this world. What we think is particularly harmful is that if we continue the whole existence of the debts that we have and all these things, we think that that's more harmful than what we try to propose in our world by the increase of taxes.
Okay. So we've had a very compelling argument as to why the government should keep taxing citizens, no matter how ridiculous some of the things that are being taxed now are. Kenyans on Twitter, KOT, the most notorious people on the East African sphere of our continent. Chat with us at KTN Home. Let us know what you think. On the other side, we have side propositions saying there are better things the government can do instead of taxing. They could lower their salaries, they could adjust their budgets, but at the end of the day, taxing is not the solution. And he gives some very interesting side effects of taxation, talking about recession and unemployment. I hope my boss is not picking up any ideas from this. But anyway, we've also had something very interesting. The question of maturity versus defaulting on a global loan. Are those two things synonymous? Are the consequences the same? Educators, again, on our Twitter handle at KTN Home, text us 22151 and we will engage with you. We'll be back shortly with the judges' deliberation. Here.
The proposition side, thank you for your submissions, and based on those submissions, the question I posit to you is this. If you concede to the fact that short-term pain leads to long-term gain, why shouldn't the Kenyan person accept to pay the taxes to benefit from the services they need? If you concede to the fact that short-term pain leads to long-term gain, why shouldn't the Kenyan person concede to paying the taxes to benefit from the services that they need from the government?
We, on the proposition, believe that the short-term pain of paying higher taxes now would lead to greater long-term gain eventually. And then why should the citizens accept this short-term pain? We believe that paying taxes is a duty of all citizens. Furthermore, we believe that all citizens would want their government to act in their best interests and to actually improve their lives. So we believe that the hope that your government would take the taxes that you have now and actually improve the financial situation for your life to improve in future would be worthwhile. Thank you.
So thank you, debaters. So this is an economic conversation as much as it is a political one. So please defend your answer economically. Is money more valuable for the economy in the hands of consumers and taxpayers as opposed to the government?
We think money is more effective in the economy when it's in the hands of consumers, when it is in the hands of the people we think are at the forefront of investment. It is when it's in the hands of consumers that it can actually grow, it can actually spread. When people are able to invest, when people are able to spend, that is the only way you actually increase the actual value of the finances you have. We think money is good when the government has it, but we think there are a lot of challenges when the government has finances. There are, as we mentioned earlier, bloated budgets. Money goes away in forms of corruption, and considering we are a third world country, we are sort of prone to these kind of problems. But we think individuals and existing in a capitalistic society means that the individual could be the very source of financial growth and the opportunity for the economy to actually make very big strides. So look at economic theory that pushes for the individual to have economic liberation, for the state to access economic liberation. Thank you.
On side opposition, we think that the government should be, like the money will be better placed if it's in the government hands because the government controls supply and demand, basic thing, right? If the government controls supply and demand, then them having money will essentially mean that they create the environment for this investment they're talking about to actually exist. So we think if the government has the money, it is better placed in terms of them strategizing and initiating policies that benefit economic models and in and of itself benefit the state as a whole, even in this recession time that the country is essentially going through right now. So we think money is better placed in the hands of the government. Yes, consumers can have this money, but we think that if the government has better economic models and the government actually has this money to begin with, then the people can have a space for them to actually invest in and a space for them to actually use their money in and of itself.
All right, so that officially marks the end of the speaker's portions of the debate. Now we move into the judge's decision as to who has won this debate. But before we take the poll from the judges, again, Twitter handle at KTN Home, we have a poll up and running at this moment. Tell us who you think won. Tell us which arguments swayed you if you were ever for the other side. Tell us which arguments you did not agree with even from the first instance. And with that said, audience in the house, can I get a drum roll, please? Hey, see, listen, drum roll. All right, Chair.
This was a tight call, but we gave it to team opposition.
Side opposition, the University of Nairobi are the winners of this tonight's episode of Campus Debates. Can you give us a justification?
Sure. So what we get from opposition, government and proposition is that this proper contextualization of the economic situation the country finds itself in today. And they go ahead to tell you that what we propose, as opposed to increasing taxes, is let's tighten our belts, let the government tighten its belts. We think that will raise more money as opposed to going back to the consumers and taxpayers. They tell you that if we go ahead with these taxes, we think that there will be possible harms to the citizens, and they, of course, do a good job at telling us what those harms are. And they equally tell us that there will be long-term harms on the economy, on the government, less investors, and all of these things. What we get from team opposition comparatively is that, one, of course, they debate against the point of this reduction of expenditure we think will affect healthcare and all of this thing. But that is well rebutted by team proposition. But what stands out at the end for them is they tell you that what is the option we have? We have looming loans which we have to pay. We must find some form of money to pay. We have two options, pay or restructure or default, whatever it is. They tell you that we think for the long-term sustenance of this country and for the economy, we think that we will rather suffer those consequences today. The things that we are taxing are things which people must consume. We will maximize that revenue, and we are okay with those with those short-term pains to gain the long-term gains. And on those grounds, we gave them to team opposition.
All right. I think that's a valid justification. All right. That wraps up the end of tonight's episode on Campus Debates. We hope you enjoyed, we hope you learned. And the most important thing to take away from tonight's debate is that Muhammad Abdullahi is of the opinion that the government should keep taxing you and taxing you for the things that you care about most importantly. But anyway, we hope you learned, we hope you enjoyed yourself. See you next time, same place, same time. I've been your host, Abigail Wairimo, and this is Campus Debates.